In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can paint your Night Lord's army for the Horus Heresy. Inspiration for this scheme has largely come from this wonderful piece of cover art for Guy Haley's book, The Night Haunter, and I really wanted to try and capture not just the colours, or get as close as I can, but also the feel that he's got on the armour. In this clip, you're going to see me putting on a pre-shade using thinned down TAMIYA flat white through the airbrush over a black primer. This isn't technically necessary for this scheme. Blue covers really well, so if you wanted to just spray with a grey primer, you could then just enter the next stage and it would be absolutely fine. But I thought it was worthwhile filming it, firstly because it's always good to see light sources, but also when I'm painting a new model, I often like to do the pre-shade simply to begin to understand the shapes on the model, identify any areas where I might have issues later on. Over our effectively grey base coat, I'm going to spray on thinned Night Lord's Blue from GW. Now this is the regular base paint version, not the air version, and I've thinned it with normal airbrush thinner, probably about 2 to 3 drops of thinner to paint. I'm just going to apply it all over the model until I have a nice even coat. You can see as more and more paint goes on, we really do start to lose the pre-shade. It's still there a little bit in the shadows and a little bit on the highlights, so if you want to do it, then by all means go ahead. And to be honest, I do on most of my models, but if you do want to speed up the process, then just starting with that grey primer would save you a few more minutes. Over the blue coat, I'm going to go back to my thinned TAMIYA white. And now I am effectively going to pre-highlight or pre-shade. So straight over the blue, I'm just identifying the areas that I want to catch the light. So my light source is the front left of the model. From his point of view anyway. And take your time with this stage. I'm using very thin TAMIYA here, probably 4 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint. I'm spraying at 20 psi. Over those highlights, I'm now going to airbrush on GW Sotek Green, and I've thinned this a similar amount that I thinned the blue earlier, so about 3 drops of thinner to paint. I'm just going over the areas that I've hit with the white. If I get a little overspray, it doesn't really matter, but it doesn't mean I should be sloppy. And then for the shadows, I'm taking VALLEJO Model Air Steel Blue. I'm just putting a little bit more colour into those dark areas. So effectively, it's a 3 blue scheme. And I've thinned this 50-50. I'm really pleased with how this blue came out. So now I'm going to give it a couple of coats of VALLEJO polyurethane gloss varnish to prepare it for the next stages, and this is thinned 2:1 thinner to varnish. First up's the pin wash. I'm going to take a little bit of black oil paint and a little bit of raw umber oil paint. Again, when we're doing pin washes, I recommend you use the highest grade oil paint you can find. This is because you can thin it down further without it breaking up, and I'm using Winsor & Newton SANSADOR thinner. So I created this nice sort of dirty brown, slightly green wash. And over the gloss model, you just pin wash this in. Now often I use an enamel paint for this particular tone, but I've been trying to move away from them just because of the smell, if I'm honest. So if I can get a similar effect with the oils, I'll be very happy. You also notice, because I've glossed the model, I've applied the decals at this stage too. And check out our other video to do with that. So here he is. I've left the oil overnight, so this is about 14 hours since I put the oil on, and you can see it's dry to the touch. I'm really happy with how the blues come out, and I'm also really chuffed that this oil mix has turned out how I hoped. I quite like the slightly glossier finish on the Night Lord's armour, almost like an enamelled finish or a lacquered finish. So I'm going to give it a satin varnish, but I've mixed it up myself using 3 drops of gloss to 1 drop of matte. And here he is where I've painted all the details in just using VALLEJO model colour black. Really gives us an idea of what the blue's going to look like. I've also blue tacked the backpack on so I can get around the back easier. Now often, for areas of connective cabling or whatever you want to call it, I'll usually do it black. But in a lot of the artwork I've seen, they have steel connective parts. So I'm going to use the same silver colour that I use on the trim for all of those parts as well. I'm going to base coat that using VALLEJO Metal Colour Series Steel. It's really nice to apply with a brush, but it does split on your wet palette, so you might just want to use a normal plastic palette for this one. For the eye lenses, I do really like these resin helmets that Forgeworld have done for the Night Lords, but as with a lot of them, it means that painting in the lenses can be a bit of a pain. But just try and get comfortable. And I'm base coating it with GW-KHORNE Red. I'm going to apply my first highlight along the bottom using GW Evil Sunz Scarlet. And then a final highlight just in the corner and along the bottom using GW Fire Dragon Bright. If this is something you struggle with, just do like 20 in a row and you'll be laughing. And then finally, that little white dot in the corner. The nice thing about the little face mask that's on this helmet is if I did get any paint on it when I was doing the eye lenses, I'm just going to paint over it now. So I try and do it in that order. And I'm base coating it using VALLEJO model colour Olive Drab. Now I've mixed a little bit of GW Ushabti Bone into it, and I apply my first highlight. And then for my final highlight, it's more or less pure Ushabti Bone. I just haven't cleaned my brush off, but I've gone straight to the Ushabti Bone on the palette. Just pick out a couple of edges. Over all the bone and all the metal areas, I've gone back to my oil mix from the day before. All I've needed to do is put a few more drops of thinner into the bowl and it's good to use again. So this is going to go over all the silver and then any bone parts as well. Just adds a little bit of shading and a nice sort of patina to the metal. Lightning is a really big part of painting Night Lords models, so I wanted to cover it in this tutorial. The first thing we're going to look at is how to approach starting the lightning bolt. So we're going to pick a start point and we're going to pick an end point. So the middle of the bolt is always going to run the full length of the panel that we're painting it onto. Now if you want to, and depending on your climate you might need to, you could use a little bit of medium, glaze medium, something like that to thin the paint down with Lamium medium, whatever. It's all very similar stuff. I've just used a little bit of water here. Just trying to paint in a nice thin, jagged line from top to bottom. Then where I've got a significant change in direction, I might add a couple of little lines coming off that. These ones don't need to reach all the way to the edge of the panel. So that's our basic outline more or less done. Now I used P3 Arcane Blue to paint this line in with, and all I've done is add a tiny bit of white into that mix. And now I'm going to paint the areas where I have that change in direction and where I have another little fork of the lightning go off. You can see already it's starting to look pretty good. Now you're almost certainly going to muck this up, like I did when I was shooting the video. Because we've got a few layers of varnish on the model, you're nice and quick. You can just wet a Q-tip, or if you want to, put a tiny bit of airbrush cleaner on it, and just gently wipe it over the surface. You're going to be able to remove the paint without damaging anything underneath it. So at least go into this with a little bit of confidence. I want to do a little bit of weathering, in fact quite a lot of weathering on this model. So I'm going to get some sponge and put on some GW Rhinox Hide. Oh, much too much on the shoulder pad there, so we'll have to turn that into a bigger area of battle damage later. Just focusing on those areas where he would get the most damage. And then with my brush, I'm going to use GW Iron Warriors and just paint a little bit of silver on those exposed edges where I've already painted some battle damage. This is to represent fresher chips. I'm also going to take the opportunity to highlight my silver armour that I did earlier. I don't really think the Night Lords probably take very good care of their kit, so I didn't want them to be super shiny or anything like that, super clean and buffed up armour and all that. So just a little bit of highlighting here and there I think is plenty. That's not where the impact from this skin comes. And lastly, a little bit of fun, a little bit of blood effects. So I've taken some TAMIYA Clear Red and TAMIYA Smoke, mixed them together. Now I'm just using the air from my airbrush, aiming it at my brush and blowing the paint off onto the model. It's good fun, but it's quite nerve-wracking, so I suggest you do it from the angle that you think the weapon that he's used may have made that strike. And that way if we do get any overspray onto the model, it should look more or less realistic. It's also really good if you've got about 7 hands to try and do this while filming it. Whoop. Nah, don't worry about it. So, here he is. I'll be honest, I've never been a huge fan of the Night Lords, and when people come on classes and they want to do the scheme, I always think they do a good job, but I never go away going, oh, I really want to paint some more Night Lords. But I did really enjoy painting this guy up. I think the blues come out really, really well. I've got to thank our commission studio head Rich for putting me onto this recipe. I think it captures that artwork that we mentioned at the start pretty closely, and with that little bit of lightning here and there, plenty of grime and blood, I actually think you're going to end up with a really cool looking army. I'm really enjoying doing this series of Heresy recipes, and thanks a lot for all the comments and the support that you guys are giving us. So if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, and if you want to see more, then hit subscribe. And I'll see you next time.